James McArthur has quietly been really good since leaving the closer's role. Is this something we can expect to continue? We'll tell you next on Locked on Royals.
You are Locked on Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Locked on Royals and the Locked on Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That is at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me and today's show, I am based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, some co-hosting, and a little bit of producing as well. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase. Those terms apply. So again, download Game Time today. What time is it? It is game time. Well, the Royals begin a 4-game series in Houston tonight. It will be quite a test for them, probably a step up from what they saw against Cleveland, mainly because Cleveland had been struggling a little bit and has been struggling over the last 55 games or so. This Houston team has played much better in the second half. They are a drastically different team than the one they saw back in April. Their rotation has really found rhythm. We talked about that in our final segment of last night's episode. You know, their offense, they're starting to have guys like the usuals and Alex Bregman, Jose Altuve, and Yordan Alvarez, you know, pair with Yanier Diaz, their young up-and-coming catcher who has just been great this year, one of the better catchers in all of the American League. And, you know, the bullpen has, you know, found more consistency than they had so many months ago at the beginning of the year in April. And as for the Royals, I would like to say this is a completely different team because there are new pieces. There are guys that are performing at a much better level than they were back in April. But for the most part, a lot of the guys that were back there in April are still here in Kansas City and will be playing in this series against the Houston Astros. One of those guys that was back on the team in April, but we viewed him in a different light than we do now, was James McArthur. And you go back just a few weeks ago, and it was when James McArthur took the mound in Detroit. Hunter Harvey had already blown the save when it was 3-1. They go into extra inning. Tris Bubic was a strike away from closing out that game the inning before, and then it was a RBI double. I believe it was a game-tying RBI double. So you have to go one more inning. At that point, the Royals were out of options to close out games, so they turned to James McArthur, and McArthur gave up the game. You know, he couldn't lock things down. He couldn't pick up the save. And in fact, that save was blown with the ghost runner rule, I think, a few pitches into his outing. But since that game, and that to me felt like the breaking point for a lot of Royals fans out there with James McArthur. And I don't fault Mac Quatrera or James McArthur for being used in that spot because they were out of arms, guys that could close out a game. James McArthur, whether you like it or not, has more than 10 saves this year. So he is one of those options if Lucas Erceg is not able to go. Or at least I thought post that Detroit game. But after that Detroit game, we saw a drastic shift in how late game situations were handled and when James McArthur was used and who would be available in the ninth inning. This was before Will Smith's implosion. This was really before Chris Stratton just became a long relief guy, for lack of a better term, or a blowout guy that's just going to come in there when you're down by 3, you're down by 4, just get us a couple of innings. He pitched in the rain delay game when it was a 5-run game at that point. So Chris Stratton, to me, I know yesterday he pitched in a 1-run game. That's a different story because, again, the bullpen was incredibly taxed. But James McArthur threw in that rain delay game, and he looked as good as he did back in April, We're talking about the last time the Royals saw the Houston Astros when McArthur had taken the closer's job from Will Smith so early on in the year. The curveball had tremendous movement to it, a really good bite to it. His two-seam had Brady Singer type movement where it can start at the right hip of a left-handed hitter and just get on the inside corner of the plate. Everything about that outing he had in the rain delay was perfect. But to this point, we saw that shift by Matt Quatraro when James McArthur blew the save in Detroit. He's not been back out there for a ninth inning scenario in which he has to close out the game. He's pitched in high leverage spots, but we have now seen him in the sixth inning. We have seen him in the seventh inning. We have not even really seen him in the eighth or the ninth inning at all. Now, there's going to be scenarios in which extra innings happen, and you might need to turn to him. But I think you have more confidence now than you did back in Detroit. After he had blown that game against Arizona and let the game slip away from him, there's been a couple of outings in which he really got roughed up. And he told Jalen Thompson, I believe it was the beat reporter for the Royals for the KC Star. It was a great story, so I do strongly recommend you going and reading it. But McArthur had worked on some things and had pointed out or figured out what he was doing wrong during his tremendous struggles. So since that story came out, we have seen a much better version of James McArthur. When you hear a pitcher, you hear a hitter say, I think I figured things out, you got to take it with a grain of salt because sometimes they feel like they figured it out, but nobody's going to believe it until the numbers look a lot better. And to me, the numbers have looked a hell of a lot better since that fateful game in Detroit. And there was a point in time I thought that was very telling to me of what Matt Quatraro views James McArthur as and how he didn't want to screw up the good stretch of outings that he had. And it wasn't a complete lack of confidence, but I thought it was good managing on Matt Quatraro's part. It was the game against, I want to say, maybe it was the Angels. Somebody might have been unavailable. I think that was the case because John Schreiber ended up getting the save in that game. So either that was last week against the Angels, which I believe it was. Yes, it was Seth Lugo's outing in which he gave up 2 runs in 7 innings, and Lucas Erceg was going to be unavailable. And John Schreiber got the save there. And when we basically knew going into the later stages of the game that Lucas Erceg was going to be unavailable, my first thought was, well, if Erceg can't go, and maybe, Bubic had already thrown, I believe it was, the thought was, okay, they're going to have to go to James McArthur. He had been better of late, and he's got save experience. He's got ninth inning experience. And John Schreiber had just come off the injured list. But in that game, it told me that Matt Quatraro would rather go to a guy who hasn't pitched at the big league level in about a month than go to James McArthur, who had been pitching well. And that wasn't to say, well, if we give him the game, he's going to blow it. I think it was to keep his confidence up and to know that, hey, moving forward, we're going to be using him in the 6th inning and the 7th inning anyways. I don't want to run him back out there in the 9th after he's already been pitching well. It's only a 1-run game, and he blows it, and now we're kind of back to square one. You don't want to do that. And that, to me, was very good managing. That was a very good sign to all of us that in the 9th inning, it's probably going to go Lucas Erceg. Number 2 would be John Schreiber, assuming Schreiber hasn't pitched, and then Chris Bubic. I think those would be the 3 guys to get a save in the 9th inning. It's no longer going to be Will Smith, even if he comes off the injured list and he's healthy and he's pitching again. It's not going to be Will Smith. It's not going to be McArthur. It's not going to be Carlos Hernandez or anything like that. To me, there are 3 options there of Erceg and Schreiber and Bubic. And James McArthur has found a new role, and he looks like a brand new pitcher. Well, kind of, because he just looks like what he did last year in September when he became the Royals closer. He looks like what he did back in April when he had just snatched the job from Will Smith. Those are all things that can make you feel really good about the bullpen moving forward. There's going to be days like yesterday where they frustrate you a little bit, but they were really good in the Cleveland series. They pitched damn well in the Cleveland series. And if James McArthur can look like what he did in the rain delay game on Wednesday night, that makes you feel completely reassured and confident and steady about who they can go to in late game scenarios. And if Hunter Harvey gets back, who knows when that would be, if at all. But if Hunter Harvey comes back, he's rested up and he's healthy, and he can be somewhat of the version that he showed the Nationals for the last 2 years. You got McArthur you can count on. You got Schreiber you can count on. You've got Harvey who you can count on. You've got Bubic who you can count on. You got Ursig who you can count on. There's 6 guys right there that give you that confidence, that give you that calming presence of when they're out there, they're going to have good stuff. It's not like a few months ago, a few weeks ago, where you were just piecing together the final 9 outs. You can kind of settle some guys into roles, and James McArthur, to me, is that 6th inning type role. He came in when Cole Reagans couldn't get through the 5th inning, and he was saved by a great MJ Melendez catch. But that, to me, is when James McArthur is going to be utilized now. Earlier on, if they go to the bullpen in the 5th inning or the 6th inning, but he's just not going to be the guy in the 8th and the 9th inning. The only way, to me, he would be asked of going out there and getting a save is if they go into extra innings, and they've already used up Ursig and Schreiber and Bubic. So we'll see if James McArthur has as good of a series that he did last year in Houston this coming weekend against a different Astros team and a different role for James McArthur. Remember, he had back-to-back saves, and one of them, I believe, was a 6-out save in that 3-game sweep of the Astros last year late in the season. Another late season series against Houston, again in Houston. If they can get that version of James McArthur, I'm going to feel pretty good about this team taking, at bare minimum, 2 of 4. We're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, want to dive into Michael Massey and what he's been doing at the leadoff spot, and overall, how I think he's had a really good season despite missing time with a back injury. That's coming up on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter X at JohnnyJ_15. 2 sponsors we want to give a shout out to, starting with Liquid IV. There's been a couple of hot days in a row here in Kansas City. Don't expect that to cool down anytime soon because it's still August, and even early on in September, it's going to be hot. You need to make sure to stay hydrated. You know, football is going to be coming back around. We got college football tonight here locally. And if you're going out to the game, I know it's fun to have a few beers, you know, have fun with friends and all of that, but stay hydrated as well. Stay safe, stay hydrated. And if you're not that type of person that likes to pound 5 bottles of water so they can, you know, last through warm weather, just simplify it and get Liquid IV packets, put one into your water bottle, drink it, and you'll be good to go. They taste good, they keep you hydrated, and they're what I have every single day, even if I'm not going to be out there in the scorching heat of Kansas City. Now, here's what you can do with Liquid IV so we can get a little bit of a deal for you. You can get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you get liquidiv.com and use code MLB at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration Today using promo code MLB at liquidiv.com. And though the Royals are in Houston, there's no better time to start looking at some prices for tickets coming up next week. It'll be one of the biggest weeks in Truman Sports Complex history. The Royals will be hosting the Cleveland Guardians Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. The Chiefs will be opening up the NFL season against the Baltimore Ravens, a rematch of the AFC Championship game on Thursday night. And then Friday, Saturday, Sunday, the Royals will host the Minnesota Twins. So should be a jam-packed week. Lots of fun. I know I'm going to be out there for a handful of the games. Want to really take in everything of this final stretch, this playoff push for the Royals. And no better time to do it than against these opponents and division rivals like Cleveland, like Minnesota. Think about going over to Game Time and look at the ticket prices and maybe buy tickets whether you're going by yourself or with multiple people, because we've got a good deal for you, as we did with Liquid IV. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase. Those terms apply. So again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It is game time. I think there is a good difference. I think there's a good separation between judging a player's season based on health, and I think judging a player's season based off of the production they gave you, even when they were battling with injuries, right? Michael Massey is a perfect example of, well, how do you judge his season, right? Is it really a good season if he didn't play 150 games? Well, take that for what it is. I mean, if the Royals were well out of playoff contention, and this is what Michael Massey was giving you, maybe I'm not as excited or I'm not as complimentary of the year that Michael Massey's been having. It has been frustrating for sure that 3 times this year, this back problem has flared up for Michael Massey, and the Royals have had to shift around their lineup and shift around their defense to aid, getting through that time where Michael Massey couldn't be in the lineup and couldn't be out there defensively, moving Michael Garcia over to second base a little bit, playing Nick Lofton there, playing Adam Frazier there. It would be a lot easier if Michael Massey was there from start to finish and he was playing in the way that he was right now. But I do think that difference that I'm talking about, the separation and judging all of that, also comes down to how good your team is, right? And to me, when you make the postseason, you give credit to guys that were maybe even here for just a few weeks, or a bullpen guy or two that had a really good month. You can give credit to that. They did enough. They did their job to get you over the edge, to give you that final push into the postseason. And it's so difficult to make the playoffs in baseball. Not so much now that the league has expanded their postseason format. There's an extra wild card team, but it's hard to stay consistent all year long because you battle injuries. There's tough stretches of the season. Odd things happen in baseball that can prevent you from getting all the way to the postseason. But Michael Massey, to me, was one of those guys I had highlighted going into the year, going into spring training and saying, last year he showed us the type of pop that he had. And from second base, when he's got good defense, he's somebody that I would feel confident in giving that job to another year. I'm not worried about a position battle. It's not like it was Massey versus Nicky Lopez because Nicky Lopez was in Chicago. I thought Michael Massey could be your second baseman for the next 2 years. I liked what he did enough last year with the pop and the bat to give him that job without much competition. And this year, I think he's taken that job and giving you reassurance that next year, there will be no debate, assuming he's healthy. And that will be a big if. It's hard to completely calm down a back injury midseason because of how many times that back is used in a baseball game. Now, when you're swinging, you're using muscles in your back. When you're throwing, you're using muscles, you're diving, all that. If you are expecting for that to calm down or be completely fixed over the course of 162, I mean, hell, even standing out there on the dirt when it's 100 degrees out, that's going to make your back feel not so good. And that's why I feel like with Michael Massey, it's flared up more than a few times. But this year, he's only played in 72 games. And even if he played every single game the rest of the way, he's not getting really that much over 100 games. In fact, I don't think he can get over 100 games this year for the Royals. There's 26 games left to go, if I'm not mistaken, right? Because they're 75 and 59. I think that's 26 games to go. No, it's 28 games to go. So he could be right at 100. We know he's not going to play every single day because that's not how Matt Quatraro has handled it. But this year, in those 72 games, 11 bombs, 37 RBIs. He's hitting 270. That's a 41-point jump from what he had last year. His on-base percentage is still below 300 because he doesn't walk. I mean, even Salvador Perez has had a spike in a walk rate this year. Michael Massey does not draw walks, which is not the best thing to have from your leadoff hitter, but Michael Garcia also wasn't somebody that was drawing walks. And even though it's a smaller sample size, higher slugging percentage, almost 100 points higher, and his OPS this year is over 100 points higher, and his OPS plus is above league average at 109, which the league average is 100 like a WRC plus, which also is above league average for Michael Massey. This is what, after the first injury happened, I was hoping he could still be a 270 hitter. We could run into anywhere from 10 to 15 home runs. I never envisioned, though, that he would be a leadoff hitter. And that has been something that has pleasantly surprised me. He had a leadoff home run yesterday. He's not the typical leadoff guy in the same way Michael Garcia was not the typical leadoff hitter. But to me, I think that this is a good solution for now. Against right-handers, Michael Massey leads off. Against left-handers, Michael Garcia leads off. And Massey's got enough pop that Garcia just doesn't. Garcia's hitting really well right now, and he's good at stealing bases. So that's good for a leadoff hitter. He's got good speed. He's got good footwork, all that stuff. And when he gets on base, he's a threat to steal bases. Michael Massey, to me, is more of the threat of I can lead off the game with a double, or I can lead off the game with a home run like he did yesterday. And he's somebody now that over time, I've gotten more and more confidence with him up at the plate. And there's a lot of guys in the lineup right now that I have confidence in when they come up to the plate, that I think they can do their job. He's not a well-rounded hitter. He doesn't really go the other way. As I said, he doesn't draw walks. He is pretty much a pull hitter, but for a second baseman at his size, I think that he is putting up a really good year, considering all the flare-ups that he's dealt with. I mean, when you have three different situations, all with the same injury, at some point you start to wonder, is he even going to be there at the end of the year? And you still need to get through these final 28 games or so and make sure that he's healthy, because you need him out there in your lineup for the postseason. And when you get to that point, if Michael Massey is still hitting in the way that he is, I put him up there with top 5 guys in the lineup, or top 6 guys in the lineup. You're hoping to get a little bit more from guys like Kyle Isbell, and you hope Michael Garcia stays hot. But there's a lot of things that Massey's done well this year. A smaller sample size than other guys, but he's above league average in a lot of offensive departments. And that's something that maybe you didn't think was possible for Massey after last year. And if that back injury was bothering him all season long, I mean, you would expect bad stretches in which he bottoms out and kind of looks closer to what he did last year in April and May, because he's just not 100%. But that's been quite the opposite. He's been really good this year for the Royals in his 72 games. And with the limited time left, if he can continue to hit like this, he will be one of those dark horse candidates in the lineup to maybe change the game at some point. Come up with bases loaded in a situation. He's not the guy you'd want up there, of course, but he's certainly not somebody I wouldn't want to have up there. He's hitting the ball well right now. He's squaring it up, and I think he's enjoying the best season of his young career. The bar wasn't very high before that, but dealing with the injuries, only 72 games, he's doing enough offensively to kind of give that Royals that final playoff push, and maybe even a final push at the American League Central Division Championship. We're going to take our final break of the show. Before we do that, thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On MLB podcast. Host Pat Sullivan, a.k.a. Sully, is here daily to provide national expertise with his trademark humor to help you get ready for the MLB playoffs here in the dog days of summer. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day on Locked On MLB. Available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. When we come back, should the Royals just keep Daniel Lynch and Carlos Hernandez up in Kansas City for the rest of the year? We'll give you our thoughts next on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. We have one more sponsor to give a shout out to, and that would be PrizePicks. And with PrizePicks, it is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app, and it has over 5 million active members. It's also the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. And unlike other apps, on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the PrizePicks community today. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks, and you can turn $10 into $1,000. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5, and you don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. So download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB and get that $50 instantly when you play the $5. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive that $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. I think we had a conversation about this last week, about Will Smith and Angel Serpa and Chris Stratton and getting questions about why are they still on the team. And the same way we get questions about Adam Frazier, Garrett Hampson. Why are they still on the team? This late into the season, I'll be quite honest that a low leverage reliever is interchangeable to me. And when Chris Stratton was out there, Angel Serpa was out there, Will Smith was out there, it was almost always to just keep the game relatively close, or they were pitching in a blowout. Then Will Smith got battered around against Philadelphia. Angel Serpa got battered around, and Chris Stratton didn't really pitch that well, but he's still here. And I don't know if that's going to be the casualty move when Hunter Harvey gets healthy, but that's also a big if Hunter Harvey can get healthy and come back before the postseason. But to my point, I think that low leverage relievers are guys that when they give you a couple of good weeks, you take it. You don't take it and say, well, they deserve a high leverage spot. I made that mistake before with Will Smith. The way he had looked from May to August, the beginning of August, it was good enough where I thought, the bullpen's struggling enough. Might give him another chance. Might give him another shot to throw in those high leverage innings because he's done it before in his career and he's quite honestly earned it. I made that mistake because the minute they put him in there, he struggled again. Now he's on the injured list, and I don't really envision him being a piece of this bullpen when he comes back. The Royals in Cleveland got really good outings from Carlos Hernandez and Daniel Lynch. Daniel Lynch had his first outing since he got demoted after the Yankees series, which was all the way back in June. So small sample size, 3-inning workload, but spin rate was up, velo was up, looked good. Carlos Hernandez had looked pretty good in low leverage spots before getting demoted. And that was to make room for somebody I can't remember right now. John Schreiber. Yeah, when John Schreiber came off the injured list, they had to send him back to Omaha. Then Carlos Hernandez comes up. He has to step in a big situation where Michael Lorenzen leaves the game early. There were 2 runners on. He gets a strikeout and then works 2 more innings and gives up only 1 run. And it was soft contact. He, like Lucas Erceg, got doinked to death a little bit, but still found a way to get out of it. And the issue for Carlos Hernandez has always been getting hit hard. He's got a very hittable fastball, but it's looked a lot better over his last 3, 4, 5 outings at the big league level. And in these final 25 to 30 games, you look at your high leverage guys and you want them to be fresh. You want Schreiber, you want Bubic, you want Erceg. When Harvey comes back, you want all those guys being fresh and trustworthy and relied on heavily. So those low leverage guys, I think you have to capitalize when somebody gives you what they did, like Daniel Lynch or Carlos Hernandez. Chris Stratton hasn't really done that. But again, I believe he's going to be the DFA candidate when Hunter Harvey's healthy. But this segment's about Hernandez and Lynch. Look at what Will Smith and Angel Serpa were giving you before Smith went on the IL and Serpa got demoted. This is not to say, Daniel Lynch and Carlos Hernandez are going to look like that every single time out. Therefore, they should stay up in Kansas City. But I do think, unless they've got an outing that mirrors what Angel Serpa and Will Smith were giving you, then there's no need to send them back down. Ride the hot hand. If they do struggle, okay. If Daniel Lynch gets roughed up in his next 2 outings, then go back to Angel Serpa because he's been here longer. He's got a bigger sample size. But if he doesn't, and he's throwing in low leverage spots, blowout games, and he's getting outs and he's throwing strikes and he looks good, there is zero reason to send him back. When Carlos Hernandez looks like what he did on Wednesday night, there's no need to send him back when Will Smith gets healthy. When those 15 days are up, you could just say, well, we're going to give him a rehab outing, or maybe get to the point, if Carlos Hernandez looks really good, where you just say, look, we're going to move on from that point. I don't see that because Will Smith was a big part of this team in terms of team morale and being one of the recruiters for this team and a big-time veteran presence in the locker room, in the clubhouse, all that type of stuff. But this late in the season, it's about getting guys in that bullpen who can get you outs. And if Daniel Lynch and Carlos Hernandez are riding the hot hand, to me, there's no reason to send them back to Omaha unless they give you a reason to send them back to Omaha. They look good in the Cleveland series. You're hoping it can continue into this Houston series. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. You can find us on wherever you get your podcasts. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, we're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. Now go check out the Locked On MLB podcast. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day. You can find the link to Locked On MLB in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Tomorrow, we're going to have a very early morning episode of a Mailbag Friday, so I'll be sending out the tweet a little bit earlier. I've got the questions over there on YouTube, and we'll be answering all of them. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.